Hello viewers, welcome to Diagnostics. Dio here. Today we have a 2000 Jeep Grand Cherokee with a 4.7 liter. The customer complaint on this vehicle is the battery gauge on the dash is low. The customer checked the charging circuit. They checked it. The voltage at the battery is 11 volts. After checking this, the customer went ahead and replaced the alternator. After replacing the alternator, the problem is still not fixed. And after that, they brought it to us so we can figure out why this alternator is not charging the battery. Okay? This vehicle died a couple of days ago. They had to jump start it to get the vehicle to start. Okay? So we have a problem in the charging circuit. We're gonna go in the vehicle and confirm the complaint. After confirming the complaint, we're gonna talk about what way we're gonna go so we can fix whatever that's causing the alternator to not charge in this vehicle. Let's start the engine and confirm the customer's complaint. So right there, as you can hear, the engine is running. And let's look at our battery gauge. So here's the battery gauge. Let me zoom you into the dash. So right there, our battery gauge is showing about 11 volts right now. Okay, this gauge should be at 14 volts with the engine running. And as you can see, it's at 11 volts. So we have a problem in the charging system. There are no lights on the dash. So now what we're gonna do is we're gonna go under the hood and use a multimeter across the battery to see what kind of voltage we have at the battery with the engine running. So I'm gonna turn on the multimeter. We are on the voltage scale. I'm gonna connect my test leads to the battery. So my negative lead is gonna go to battery negative, so black to battery negative, and the red test lead is gonna go to battery positive. Okay. So right now, with the engine running, we are reading 12.21 volts. So 12.21 volts is low, okay? So this charging system is not working. And as you can see, our alternator looks new. So the alternator was replaced at some point. Okay, the battery is good, but the voltage we have is lower than normal, okay? So now let's go in the vehicle and turn off the engine. We're gonna scan the engine computer to see if we have any trouble codes in the engine computer, okay? This charging circuit is not working. We have only 12 volts at the battery with the engine running. So now I'm gonna turn off the engine. I'm gonna turn the key on. I'm gonna get the scan tool connected to the vehicle. After I get the scan tool connected, I'll bring you guys back up so we can scan the engine computer. I got the scan tool connected to the vehicle. I'm gonna bring it up. So we're gonna scan this. I'm sorry for the glare. This is a Jeep. So we're gonna scan all the control units on the vehicle. So let's see what we got. So right off the bat, we have 2 trouble codes in the engine computer. So that's good. At least we have something, although we don't have any lights on the dash, but we have 2 codes in the engine computer. So hopefully these codes will give us direction to fix the problem. So let's wait until the scan tool finishes scanning all the control units. The scan tool is done scanning all the control units on the vehicle. We're gonna focus on the engine computer. We have a battery code in the TCM. Battery was disconnected, and we have a charge system voltage too low trouble code in the engine computer, P0622, and then the second trouble code is P0622, and it says generator field not switching properly. Okay, so I believe this code over here is what's causing the alternator to not charge the battery. Okay, let's scroll down and see what else we have. All right, so we're gonna go back here and go into the engine computer. We're gonna focus on these alternator codes. Now what I want to do is I want to go to data. Okay, now we know that the alternator is new. Is it a bad alternator? Did they get a defective alternator out of the box? Is it a wiring issue or is it a computer issue? So I'm going to select, hopefully we have some alternator data PIDs over here. Let's see if the computer is controlling the alternator. So I'm gonna look for any control data PIDs for the alternator or anything pertaining to the charging system. So we're gonna scroll down this list. So we're gonna grab our voltage sense data PID, target changing voltage. Let's keep scrolling. Hopefully we have some alternator data PIDs. So that's it. These are the only data PIDs that we have. Okay, only 2 data PIDs. So I'm gonna show these selected data PIDs. Now let's start the engine and see what we got. Okay, so as you can see, our target charging voltage is 13.72 volts and our actual voltage is 12.11 volts. So our voltage right now, our system voltage is lower than normal. Okay, so there's something wrong with the charging system. So now what do we do? How do we fix this? We have already confirmed that on the gauge on the dash. We also confirmed that with the multimeter at the battery under the hood. We have the same voltage over here. Okay, so our charging system is now working. Now what do you do? Now I'm gonna turn off the engine. I'm gonna tell you what we're gonna do to fix this problem. So we're gonna go under the hood. Let's go do some tests at the alternator. Let's do a voltage drop test at the alternator first. We're gonna do a voltage drop test on the positive side of the alternator, then on the negative side of the alternator. Okay? If we don't have any voltage drops at the alternator, then we're gonna check the control wires coming from the ECM at the alternator. Okay? Because we could have an open in the alternator wiring. But before we do that, let's go to our service information first. I'm going to look up our charging circuit. Let's see how this system is wired so we can familiarize ourselves with this system. So we're gonna go into our service information here. Let's see what we got. So here is the wiring diagram of our charging circuit. Here is the alternator. Okay, so we have 3 wires at the alternator. This is going to be our B positive terminal at the alternator. So this wire is going to have battery voltage all the time, and we have 2 wires that come from the engine computer. Okay, this is the computer. So we have Gen FLD and Gen source. So I believe one of them is going to be the control wire, and then the other one is going to be the feedback to the computer. Okay, if we follow this wire, you'll see that it goes to a fusible link, and then it goes all the way up to this power distribution center. Okay, so what we're gonna do is we're gonna go under the hood and do a voltage drop on the negative side of the alternator. So we're gonna connect our multimeter to the alternator casing, and then the other lead of the multimeter to battery ground. We're gonna start the engine to see if we have high resistance on the ground side. And after checking the ground side, we're gonna check the power side. Okay? After we do that, after we check voltage drop, then we're gonna check these 2 wires. Okay? So now let's go under the hood. So my multimeter is still set up on the voltage scale. So I'm gonna connect my red lead on the B positive terminal of the alternator. and then my black lead is gonna go to battery positive. Okay, so basically my multimeter is connected in series, okay, with the power wire at the alternator. Okay, right now we have 0 volts because there is no current flow between the battery and the alternator. So now what we're gonna do is we're gonna start the engine and turn on the lights to see what kind of reading we're gonna have on a multimeter. Can you start that for me, please, Bishop? Awesome. Thank you. So as you can see, the engine is running. Can you turn on the lights, please? Yeah, headlights. Awesome. All right, so as you can hear, the engine is running. The headlights are on. We are loading the charging circuit, and our reading is minus 0.01 volts. Okay, we have this minus because our leads are backwards. So this over here tells me that we don't have a voltage drop on the positive side of the alternator. Okay, the rule of thumb here is we don't want anything over 300 millivolts. Okay, if you have a voltage over 300 millivolts while the engine is running, you have high resistance on the power wire. Okay, so that's good. So now we're gonna do a voltage drop test on the negative side of the alternator. The good thing about this alternator is it's easy to get to. So I'm gonna move my alligator clamp to the alternator ground, okay, which is gonna be this bolt over here. We're gonna connect it to the case right there, the case of the alternator. As you can see, we're reading system voltage, which is low. Now I'm gonna switch this negative lead to battery negative. So now we're going negative to negative, okay? And we have 0.01 volts. So this is a good reading. We don't have any voltage drops on the negative side of the alternator, so we're good. Okay, no voltage drops on the negative side and no voltage drops on the positive side of the alternator, so we're good. Can you turn it off for me, please? Perfect, thank you. All right, so we can already rule out a voltage drop issue. We don't have a voltage drop. Our charging system is still not working. So what do you think is the problem? Well, at this point, we have to check these 2 wires over here. I'm going to show you the wiring diagram again. So we checked the ground side of the alternator and the positive side of the alternator. No voltage drops here. So now we're going to check these 2 wires. Okay. Now, before we check these 2 wires that are coming from the computer, I want to look up the charging system and see how it works. Let's familiarize ourselves with this system. Okay, so now what I'm gonna do is let's back out. Let's go to charging system. So here it is. Let's go to operation. So we can read really quickly about how this system works. Okay. Oh, the glare. I'm sorry for the glare. So it says that the amount of amperage produced by the generator is controlled by the electronic voltage regulator, EVR, circuitry within the powertrain control module, PCM. So the electronic voltage regulator circuitry is connected in series with the generator field driver, terminal, and ground. A battery temperature sensor, BTS, located in battery tray is used to sense battery temperature. Sensed battery temperature and data from monitored line voltage is used by PCM to adjust battery charging rate. So this vehicle doesn't have a battery temperature sensor. This is accomplished by cycling the ground path to control the strength of generator motor magnetic field. PCM then compensates and regulates generator amperage output accordingly. So the computer basically turns on and off the regulator. Okay, and this regulator is in the engine computer. Okay, so we can read. There's a lot of information here. So now what we need to do is we're gonna check the 2 wires at the alternator that are coming from the engine computer. We're gonna look for a control pulse width modulated signal coming from the engine computer to control the alternator, and the other one is going to be the feedback, which is supposed to be system voltage, to let the computer know that the charging circuit is working. Okay, so let's look at the wiring diagram once again before we check those 2 wires. So here we have so we got these 2 wires. So now we're gonna back probe these 2 wires at the alternator. One of them is gonna be a pulse width modulated control, and the other one should have system voltage on it. Any voltage that we're gonna have on these wires will be coming from the engine computer. Okay, so if we have 12 volts or 5 volts or even less, any voltage on these wires will be coming from the computer, because these wires go from the computer to the alternator. If we have 0 volts on these wires, what would that tell us? That would tell us that we either have an open in the wiring or a bad computer. But usually when you have a bad computer, you won't have your pulse width modulated control, okay? But if we don't have any voltage here, that can be a problem in the wiring, all right? So now I'm going to grab my back probing tool or piercing tools. It's really nice because these wires are just right here. We can access these wires really easily. So I'm gonna pierce these 2 wires, and after that we're gonna bring up our lab scope so we can check these 2 wires coming from the computer. If these 2 wires check out okay, at that point our problem could just be a defective alternator. I'm gonna bring up my lab scope and then I'll bring you guys back up. I got my lab scope here under the hood. We're gonna use these piercing tools, okay, to check these wires. Now, after I'm done using these piercing tools, I'm gonna use some liquid tape to seal the wire, okay? All right, so we got the first one on. Now we're gonna connect to the second wire. All right, so that's good. So we're gonna connect our ground, our scope ground to battery ground. All right, so we are connected to the 2 wires that come from the engine computer. So now we're gonna set up our lab scope. We're gonna go to scope multimeter. So we're gonna turn on the first channel and the second channel. We are on the voltage scale. Okay, so right now we have about 0.02 volts on these 2 wires. So right now the key is off. So I'm gonna go in the vehicle and turn on the key first to see what voltages we're gonna have here. All right, so the key is on. Key on. Okay, key off. Key on. All right, so when the key first got turned on, our voltage went up and then came back down. So can you go ahead and start the engine? So the engine is running and we have about 11 volts on the 2 wires at the alternator, okay? So right here we have 11.94 volts on the yellow trace and 12.01 volts on the green trace. And these voltages are coming from the engine computer because these 2 wires are coming from the engine computer. So these 2 wires are connected to the engine computer, okay? So on our wiring diagram, we are connected to these two wires over here, which are coming from the engine computer. So this voltage that we see on the lab scope screen is coming from the engine computer. So what does that tell me? That tells me that our wiring from the alternator to the computer is good. Okay, so this wiring over here is good, so we don't have a wiring problem. Okay, so the wiring from this computer to the alternator is good because the voltage we see over here is coming from the engine computer. Okay, so right there. All right, so now what I'm gonna do is I'm going to unplug the connector at the alternator because is the voltage we have here on the lab scope, is it coming from the computer or is it the alternator that's sending this voltage to the computer? Okay, so I'm gonna unplug this connector. After unplugging the connector, if we still have voltage on these wires, that will tell me that our wiring is good. Okay, that's just one more test you can do to be 100% sure that the wiring is good. So I unplugged this connector over here. Let's see what we got. So alternator connector unplugged. We have 11.93 volts on the yellow trace and 0.06 volts on the green trace. So we have system voltage on the yellow trace and then 0.06 volts on the green trace. Okay, so this tells me that our wiring is good. Okay, now this engine computer is supposed to command this alternator to charge the battery. So what we are missing here is our control. So there is no control at the alternator. I'm gonna reconnect this electrical connector. Okay, so what do you think the problem is? Okay, the alternator is not charging, the wiring is good, we don't have voltage drops at the alternator, our wiring between the alternator and the engine computer back there is good, the alternator is new, but the system is still not charging. What do you think is the issue? Well, I can tell you that right now I know what the problem is. Since our wiring is good, we don't have voltage drops at the alternator and the alternator is new, our problem is the computer. The computer is defective. Okay, the computer is bad because the computer is supposed to turn on and off this alternator. It's supposed to send a command. Right now the command is not there. We should have a pulse width modulated control on this green trace, okay, which is not there. So the driver that controls this alternator in the computer is defective. You can go ahead and turn it off. Okay, so that's it, guys. This was a quick and easy one. I can leave this over here. I feel comfortable calling for a computer. The other test we could do is we can check our powers and grounds at the computer to make sure that the computer is being powered properly. But I don't think we have a power and ground problem, because if we did, it would affect other circuits, not just the alternator. Okay, if we were missing power or ground at the engine computer, we were gonna have all kinds of trouble codes. Okay, and a lot of things were gonna be affected around the engine. Now, if I bring up our service information again, okay, if we look at the way this system works, just for the last time, you'll see that this regulator is inside the computer. So the driver is in the computer. So it's the computer that turns on and off this alternator. Okay, so we just read this. Okay. So these are the possible causes. And here it says the PCM monitors critical input to control fuel injection, ignition, emission, and other engine management functions. The PCM is also programmed to monitor charging system related circuit. Okay, battery feed to PCM, generator field control, battery charging voltage. Okay, so let's go to description. Okay, charging system consists of a powertrain control module, generator, malfunction indicator light, and battery. Generator consists of a rotor, stator, rectifier, front and rear covers, and driver pulley. Generator is serviced as a unit, as a complete unit only. Voltage regulator is controlled by the PCM. Okay, so the PCM controls the voltage regulator. Voltage regulator is controlled by the PCM. Electronic voltage regulator, EVR, is not a separate component, but a circuit located within the PCM. If EVR circuit is defective, PCM must be replaced. Okay, so this regulator is in the PCM. That's what they're telling us here. Okay, and if the regulator is bad, you replace the PCM. And I believe this is our problem here. Okay, just read this last sentence. Okay, voltage regulator is controlled by the PCM. Electronic voltage regulator is not a separate component, but a circuit located within the PCM. If electronic voltage regulator circuit is defective, PCM must be replaced. So in this case, our problem is the PCM, because our wiring is good, the alternator is new, we don't have voltage drops at the alternator. The problem is the PCM. After replacing the PCM, this charging system will be working again. Okay, so I'm gonna recommend replacing the PCM. We're gonna get a PCM on this vehicle. After we replace it, this will be fixed. So I'm gonna leave this right over here. I'll bring you guys back up after we get the PCM replaced so that we can verify our repair. Okay, so we'll get a PCM on this and then I'll bring you guys back up. All right guys, after 3 weeks, the Jeep is back. The ECM has been replaced. Remember last time we made a call, we said that the ECM was bad. That's why the alternator wasn't charging the battery. So Bishop Morris here has replaced the ECM. Okay, so we didn't replace the ECM. Bishop replaced it and now it's fixed. So Bishop is gonna kind of bring us up to speed and tell us what he did. Can you tell us what you did to replace this ECM?
Sure. Dale at K Diagnostics was dead on. The diagnosis was correct.
Awesome.
Replacing the ECM is pretty straightforward. You do have to remove this coolant tank. It's not too difficult. 10 millimeters here, and this will slide straight out. You remove this connector. Mm-hmm. That's the only thing you have to remove to pull that out. This can remain.
Okay. Did you have to remove the battery or no?
You did have to remove the battery. Some people say you don't, but I really did. Why? Because this assembly here really has to come out to get to the ECM, which is back there.
Do you know what this is? Is this the transmission computer?
Could well be.
Yeah?
Yeah.
Okay.
And it comes out with 2 bolts, 2 10 millimeters down there, 1 and 2.
Yeah.
And it'll come straight out as well as this 10 millimeter here.
Okay.
Another hint, these connectors that you see here do not need to be pulled apart. They can come with this assembly in this case.
Oh, okay. So you didn't disconnect them, you just removed the whole
That's correct. This
bracket.
Connector can stay, this connector can stay, connected and attached. They just pry them away from this frame. The ECM is on the back side of this frame.
Wow, it's hidden back there?
It's hidden back there. And you remove this frame once you get all these other things out by 1, 2, and then a third
underneath there?
Nut right under here.
Wow.
So
to get to the ECM.
To get to the ECM. Not too bad though, really. As I say, this has got to come out, this, and then this just slides right on out and you have clear access.
Perfect.
The gotcha, or one thing to keep in mind is the ECM bolts to the back of this frame.
And the bolts go this way or that way?
They go this way, right in here.
Then how do you get to the, I guess you have to remove the wheel well kind of liner?
No, if you take out 1, 2, and 3, that frame will come out.
Ah, okay. Okay.
That this bolts to, and then there are of course 3 connectors that you see there. Go 1, 2, and 3. Those just slide right on out.
Yeah.
And then the 3 bolts. The problem is these are Torx-headed bolts that go in here. Bad. Had to grind it off, and then
I'm
this
sure they
was
were
the only
stuck
one
on. Wow.
Yes.
Wow. You just cut them off?
Just cut them off and then just replace
Interesting.
it. But that's pretty straightforward. It's
Interesting.
very
Wow.
doable.
Wow.
But you got to take this guy off because this has to come out, and there's no other way.
Okay. Wow. Thank you very much. So this over here was the problem. We did remove 4 bolts that hold this cover against the ECM case. I wanted to look into the ECM because when you look at the ECM, it looks like water got in it. So I wanted to look inside and see if we had water in it. So we removed this cover. Look at what we found. There's this little jelly, material, whatever this is. But, I don't know water. I don't think water got into the motherboard, but the ECM is bad. We replaced the ECM. Now the charging system is working. So the first thing I'm gonna do is I'm gonna start the engine. We're gonna look at the charge gauge on the dash. We're gonna read the voltage on the dash first, and then we're gonna come back here under the hood. We're gonna take a voltage measurement at the battery, and then we're gonna look at our voltages at the alternator electrical connector with our lab scope. And after that, we're gonna wrap up this video. So let's go in the vehicle and start the engine so we can watch the voltage on the dash. So Bishop, if you can start the vehicle for us, please. Because that gauge on the dash, I think was showing like 10 volts last time. Yeah, so the voltage was really low. Let's see right now if the voltage is gonna be better with the new ECM. So as you can hear, the engine is running. And our gauge is now showing, what's that, 14 volts? Yeah. So we have 14 volts. So we're looking at this gauge over here. Yeah, this one. So we're reading 14 volts. So that's good. Our charging system is working. Perfect. Good job, Bishop. Off? Yes. Let's turn it off for now. So now I'm going to connect to the battery. And then we're going to start the engine again. So we have 14 volts on the dash. We don't have to do the measurement at the battery because we know it's working already. So I'm gonna go straight to the alternator. There is no need to take a voltage measurement at the battery. Actually, I'm gonna go to these 2 small wires over here. Yeah, so these 2 wires, actually I'm gonna leave it connected to the alternator. Yes, can you connect that for me, please? Perfect. Okay. Yeah, so I'm gonna go straight to the alternator. Let's check these 2 wires and see what we got here. If I remember correctly, last time we only had a flat line on both wires, and I think we were reading 11 volts or 10 volts on both wires. There was no activity on these 2 wires. So I believe one wire should have system voltage, and then the other wire should be the control coming from the engine computer. So, okay, we got these 2 on. I'm gonna get my lab scope set up so we can watch the voltage on these 2 wires. Perfect. So the engine is running. Now let's see what we have on the lab scope screen. What do you see, Bishop?
Wow.
Can you tell the difference now?
Oh yeah.
Yeah, big difference.
Very clean.
Very clean spike. So we have some type of on and off, control on the lab scope screen. Now you see how it's off the screen?
Yeah.
So to get everything in the screen, we're gonna have to increase our scale. So we're just gonna click over here. Okay, just increase your scale. Maybe go to 50. Yeah. See, now it's on the screen.
Okay. Look at that.
Now, if you want to see it a little bit bigger, we can just lower these 2. Actually, can you lower both of them a little bit? Okay, now go back to 20 volts.
Whoops, I'm sorry.
Yeah, 20 volts on the green trace. Yeah, now you can see right there on the screen.
Very clear.
Okay, now we can increase our time base so we can see more repetition. So right now we have 20 milliseconds per screen. So you can increase it maybe to like 100 milliseconds. See right there?
Very clear.
Okay. Now you will see every once in a while you will see a bigger pulse.
Yes.
This is kind of what I was telling you last time over the phone. It's like right now the computer is controlling the alternator. It's telling the alternator when to charge the battery and when to not charge the battery. Okay, so sometimes it keeps it on longer and sometimes it's, so this is a pulse width modulated control. Yeah, you'll see every once in a while there's a bigger pulse, you know, sometimes it comes back, and yeah, so this is the computer controlling the alternator.
Okay, and the yellow represents what is that? What is that?
So the yellow right now, let's see what voltage we have there. We have 0.02. So, well, I don't know. That's supposed to be some type of feedback, but I mean 0.02 on the feedback. It looks like there's a ground there. I mean, the system is working. The charging system is working, so I don't want to worry about that. We definitely have activity over here on the lab scope screen,
which we didn't have before.
Which we didn't have before. So we made the right call. The problem was the computer. This is fixed. So if you have a scope and you scope those two wires at the alternator and you don't see this pattern, it means your problem is either the alternator or the computer. Now, the question is, if we disconnect that electrical connector, are we still gonna have this command there? That's what we need to figure out. So if we can disconnect this connector here,
this one?
I don't know if you can carefully, no, the connector at the alternator.
Oh.
Yeah. If we can carefully disconnect that.
Like just straight on out?
Yeah, straight on out.
There you go.
Okay, so we disconnected. We lost our control here. So for the control to be there, the connector has to be connected. So that's good to know. And right now, they both went down to 0. So what we're doing right now is just experiment, guys. Okay, we're just trying to see what type of voltages we were gonna see on the connector with the connector being disconnected.
And they're back.
Back? Okay, perfect. Okay. Okay, so, yeah.
Before, I think we had 11 or 12 constant.
On both wires, yeah. On both wires. So that was probably an indication of, I don't know, a shorted driver in the computer. Maybe if I could take a guess, I'm not sure, but that's probably what it is. So, all right, guys. So we're gonna leave it right over here. This is fixed. We're gonna turn off the engine so we can wrap up this video.
Good job,
so,
diagnostics.
Thank you. So this is what we're supposed to see on the lab scope screen. Bishop, last words?
Always a pleasure hanging out with my buddy Dale.
All right, guys. So it's always a pleasure hanging out with you, Bishop. It's good to have Bishop in the shop. You should come more often, you know?
Yeah.
All right, so we made the right call on this Jeep. Bishop replaced the ECM. After replacing the ECM, the charging system is fixed. We talked a lot about it last time when we did the diagnosis. So we were right, we made the right call, and now all is well. And I'm sure Bishop is gonna have a happy customer.
I think so.
Yeah, all right. So thanks guys for watching. If you have any comments, criticism, questions, leave them in the comment box. If this is your first time here, subscribe to the channel, ring the bell so you can get notified every time I upload a new video. Okay? If you're already a subscriber coming back to watch this, I appreciate you. Thanks for watching. See you next time.